Hey y'all, welcome to Unit 6, Day 4. I've decided to switch things up a little bit. We were originally going to cover both Napoleon and the Congress of Vienna in one video, but I decided to split it up into two. So you'll need to make sure you watch the video about Congress of Vienna for homework tonight. We're starting to wind things down for the unit, so you really only have these two subjects left to take notes on. Starting next class, in class, you are going to begin working on your project for this class, or for this, for this unit. So remember that you're not actually going to take a test, but you're going to create something. You're doing an in-class project, and that will serve as your test grade. So please, by the time you come in next class, make sure you've watched all the videos, you've taken all of your notes. For your project, you're going to very heavily rely on your notes, so let me remind you again. If you have questions about what you should be writing down, please come in and see me. If I've seen that you've made a good faith effort in taking your notes, I'm happy to let you look at my notes to make sure you've got what you need to have, okay? So let's just go ahead and jump right on in. Today we are talking all about this guy right here, Napoleon de Bonaparte. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background information about him before we just jump into what he has to do with the French Revolution, with that time period. So Napoleon de Bonaparte is a Frenchman, but his family is Italian. He was born and raised on the island of Corsica, which is in the Mediterranean Sea. It's in between Italy and France. It's one of those islands. When he was 10 years old, his family moved to East Central France, where he was enrolled in a military academy. He eventually, the military works for him. This is a good thing for him. And he eventually works his way up and he becomes a second lieutenant in the French army. He was a great military leader, fantastic, okay? And I think this is the first part of what you need to be writing down. He had the ability to move troops quickly, okay, which was not always an easy task to do, but he was able to move troops quickly. He was able to gain the support of the troops as well as improve the morale. So he was able to keep his troops pretty much in good spirits as he was leading them, which is really important. So what did he have to do with the French Revolution? Well, France was basically falling apart from the inside. Their government's falling apart. They were fighting off foreign powers. And the Directory, remember that group of 5 men who had made the major decisions of the government? They invited France's most successful general, which was Napoleon, to come and take over control of the government. So this is where Napoleon comes on the scene. They were looking to him to institute martial law, meaning they wanted the military to be in control of the government, okay? And they were looking for him to bring back some sense of order to France. It'd been pretty chaotic in France at this point, and so they're looking for things to kind of get a little bit more stable, okay? So I absolutely love this quote by Napoleon because it perfectly sums up how it was that he came to become Emperor of France. I found the crown of France lying on the ground and I picked it up with my sword. So Napoleon had gotten word that the Directory was falling apart and ineffective. He had been off in like Egypt, in that area, fighting with some troops. So as soon as he got word of this, he and his troops, they rushed back to Paris. And on November 10th, 1799, he staged a coup d'etat, which you'll remember is one of your vocab words, but 2, it also means it is a sudden takeover of the government, okay? So he becomes the dictator of France, just like that. He just becomes the dictator of France, okay? He goes in, he swoops in, takes over, that's it. And the French people were okay with that. They were desperate for stability. Things had been so crazy, they were ready for things to kind of get back to quote unquote normal, okay? Well, stability plus the fact that no one really wanted to protest out of fear for what might happen. So remember that they just came through the Reign of Terror with Robespierre, who would have your head roll if you were not liberal enough or if you were too liberal. So it was relatively easy for Napoleon to come in and take over and gain the support of the French people. When he first took power, he was part of a triumvirate, meaning that 3 people were in charge. And those other 2 people, they were members of the old Directory. But by 1802, those 2 kind of leftover guys, they basically had no power, and Napoleon was running the entire shebang by himself. So he gave himself unlimited power, and here are a few examples of how he did that. He alone commanded the Navy and the Army. He appointed and dismissed officials as he saw fit, didn't need any rhyme or reason, just could do it if he wanted to. He was the only one to propose any new laws. and he proposed them all. That was it. He was the law guy. And finally, he respected the Declaration of Rights of Man. So you can imagine how that must have made all of the common people of France feel. They've been through the age of absolutism, then they had the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror, and now here's Napoleon, and he's ready to support the Declaration of Rights of Man. So this is Napoleon's this is Napoleon's empire. It is quite vast. His empire included France, Corsica, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, Switzerland, and the German states. He had control over all of that area. And he truly thought that it was France's destiny to lead all of Europe, and that it was his destiny to be the guy to make that happen. Now, while he was a great military leader, he probably wasn't the best politician, and here's why. So as he conquered these various places, he would remove the monarch from the throne and instead put a member of his own family in charge of the countries that he had conquered. So this includes places like Spain, Italy, and Westphalia. So now, just because he had family members on the thrones of these conquered countries, now that doesn't mean that he was ready to give up full control. He had no intention of giving up true power to his family members. He just wanted somebody in that position that he could control. So Napoleon, he does make some positive contributions to France. First, he established the Napoleonic Code. This is a vocab term which you should recall. It was a uniform set of laws that all people were expected to follow. And it eliminated many of the injustices of the time. So a lot of the issues that people had been facing, the unfairness, it got rid of this stuff. Education was a really big deal to Napoleon. He was responsible for instituting a national public education system across France. And this is going to include primary and secondary schools. He also started trade and military schools and vocational schools across France. And the second good thing he did for France was the rise in nationalism. So remember that nationalism is defined as pride in one's country. It's going to be something that you're going to hear me say over and over and over again for the rest of the school year. It is a really big deal from here on out. Okay, now, yes, Napoleon was a great military leader, but he did make some pretty drastic mistakes along the way. So he made enemies, specifically in Portugal, Great Britain, Sweden, and Russia, and here's how he did it. So in 1806, Napoleon set up a blockade between Great Britain and the rest of Europe. He called this the Continental System, and basically what he was trying to do was crush Great Britain economically by ruining their commercial and their industrial economy. In 1808, he was trying to get Portugal to go along with the Continental System. So to do this, he sent troops marching through Spain, and of course the Spanish were offended by this and they protested. So Napoleon removed the king of Spain from his throne and put his brother in charge. Well, this really, really angered the Spanish people, and it fired up their nationalistic feelings as well. So for 6 years, Spanish guerrilla fighters, they kept Napoleon's men on their toes. Napoleon, this wasn't the type of fighting that he was trained in or that he was accustomed to fighting. He was used to meeting on a battlefield and you fight, not having people that would hide and then just jump out and ambush you, okay, or ambush him. In the end, Napoleon lost about 300,000 men over the course of these 6 years, and they also just weren't quite prepared for that sort of loss. So in your notes where it says that he managed to wipe out the military resources of France, the first thing that I want you to write down is the Portugal-Spain Peninsula battle, okay? They were fighting all along this area here, okay? All right. So as these other countries had been conquered by Napoleon, as they see what's happening, they also begin to see a rise in nationalism, okay? Which means nothing but trouble for Napoleon. So as if this weren't bad enough, in 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia because the Tsar was not refusing to trade with Britain. He was trying to get everybody to basically cut off Great Britain. So the alliance between France and Russia falls apart, and Napoleon ended up invading. So in June of 1812, 420,000 French troops marched into Russia. Now, Alexander I was Tsar of Russia, and he refused to fight in an unequal battle. So his troops were pulled back, okay? And as they retreated, what they did was they practiced the scorched earth policy. That's important. Please write that down. So that second bullet should say campaign into Russia. Please make sure you write down scorched earth policy. This was when the soldiers burned grain fields and they slaughtered livestock as they marched through, as they retreated. And they did this so that the French forces behind them would not be able to eat. The two troops, the two countries' armies, they did end up eventually fighting right outside of Moscow. And Alexander I, he refused to let Moscow, which was the capital of Russia, fall to Napoleon. So instead, he set the city on fire. Napoleon hung around Moscow until about the middle of October, but by the time he decides to retreat and head back to France, it's too late. The harsh, very harsh Russian winter had already begun to settle in. His soldiers were dressed inappropriately. They didn't have like really heavy coats on. And so many of the soldiers were either killed from one of these three battles, or they died from their wounds and because they did not receive proper medical attention, or they died mid-March, as in like marching back to France, due to either exhaustion, hunger, and or cold. By the time Napoleon left Moscow, he only had about 10,000 soldiers left. Remember, he started with 420,000 troops, so he lost quite a bit. Needless to say, it is time for Napoleon to go. Okay, he wanted to continue fighting, but the generals in his army refused. They completely refused, and so he was exiled. He had to accept the terms of surrender. France brought King Louis XVIII, who was a very weak and a very unsure leader, to rule France. Napoleon was exiled to Elba, which is this island right here. You can see it's right out here off of the coast of Italy. Okay, so Napoleon is exiled to Elba. He got bored, and within a couple of weeks, he was right back in France. So remember how I told you that Louis XVIII was a weak and unsure ruler? He was very unsure of himself. He ended up fleeing once he found out that Napoleon had returned to France. So now, remember all those enemies that Napoleon had made along the way? Prussia, Great Britain, the Netherlands, they all sent troops to help defeat Napoleon again. And this time it was at the Battle of Waterloo. Waterloo was a village in Belgium, and on June 18, 1815, Napoleon attacked. The British were able to hold Napoleon off, and when Prussian troops arrived later in that afternoon, together Britain and Prussia were able to defeat Napoleon's army. So after 2 days of fighting, Napoleon's troops were exhausted and they retreated. All the while, they were being chased again by British and Prussian armies. Okay. Now this time, Napoleon is exiled to St. Helena. You can tell that the French learned their lesson last time they exiled him, and he made it back. So St. Helena is a tiny island in the South Atlantic Ocean where the red star is on the map there. He lived there alone for 6 years, where he wrote his memoirs. He did not try to leave St. Helena. He ended up dying on St. Helena in 1821, most likely from stomach cancer. So everyone leaves a legacy. Napoleon is no different. History has managed to kind of overlook or forget many of his massive failures, and instead they celebrate the great things that he did. So what is he remembered for? First, he attempted to unite Europe as one under French leadership. He wasn't successful, but it was also a huge undertaking. Second, he enforced the Napoleonic Code, which did 3 major things. It applied to all people, it was a set of clearly stated laws, and it also allowed for freedom of religion. And the third thing Napoleon is remembered for is the growth of nationalism. It was a big deal under Napoleon in France, and then it was replicated in places like Italy, Germany, and Latin America. So, okay, that covers Napoleon. Next class, or the next video you're going to watch, is going to cover the Congress of Vienna. It will not be very long. There's just not that much meat to that subject, but there is, but we'll cover it. So we're going to do Congress of Vienna, and then we're going to begin working on your class project. It's an individual project. It must be submitted on Google Classroom, but I'll go over all of the requirements next class, okay? See you then.